Something is stirring underneath everything, and if you felt it, you're not making it up. This isn't silence for the sake of silence. This isn't distance with no meaning behind it. This is the moment where something they've been avoiding for a long time finally starts to move. A decision is quietly taking shape somewhere inside them, somewhere you can't see, and once it fully rises to the surface, things between you won't stay the same. You've probably sensed it, that steady nagging pull in your gut telling you something's about to shift. You're not imagining that. Right now, a real decision is forming inside them. Not some throwaway choice made on a whim, not something they'd casually mention in conversation, but a slow, private unraveling happening in the deepest part of who they are. And even without either of you saying it out loud, that decision has everything to do with you. From where you're standing, they might look totally unaffected, calm, distant, maybe even colder than usual, like nothing's going on beneath the surface. But that outward calm is deceiving. Inside, something they've pushed away for a long time has grown too heavy to keep ignoring. The usual trick of avoidance isn't working anymore. And here's where most people get it wrong. This isn't just about whether they miss you, or whether they'll come back, or whether it's over for good. It goes much deeper than that. What's really happening is about what your connection stirred up inside them, what it exposed about who they are, what it made them confront once they couldn't dodge it anymore. Because some connections don't just brush the surface. They don't pass through someone without leaving a mark. They settle in, they stick around, and eventually they demand some kind of internal reckoning. Right now, they're standing at a genuine crossroads, a real turning point. They're facing something inside themselves that could reshape the direction of their entire life. And no matter which way they go, towards you or away, they won't walk away from this moment unchanged. That tension you've been picking up on has a reason behind it. So does the distance. Even the silence means something. None of this is random. Underneath it all is a quiet inner battle that's been building for a while and is now hitting its peak. Whatever happens next will say more than words ever could. It'll show you exactly who they are once the comfort zone is gone, once avoidance stops working, once there's nowhere left for fear to hide. What you're picking up on isn't your imagination pretending to be intuition. It's the real, subtle ripple effect of someone wrestling with themselves because something about you touched parts of them they almost never let anyone near. In their private thoughts, no matter which direction they try to go, they keep circling back to the same place, back to you, back to what they felt, back to something that was never fully worked out or understood. For a long time, they tried to outrun it. They stayed busy. They buried themselves in routines, responsibilities, distractions, pride, distance, anything to keep occupied. They told themselves it was just intense in the moment, and that intensity always fades eventually. But real connection doesn't play by convenient rules. It doesn't just disappear because someone wants it to. And the harder they tried to bury it, the more it kept popping back up in moments they didn't expect, refusing to stay buried. What existed between you was never shallow. It didn't just graze the surface of who they are. It reached something deeper, some part of them that logic and planning and self-discipline don't govern, a part that doesn't just shift because life gets complicated. Now, they're doing something they never expected to do. They're re-examining everything, not just what you meant to them, but what this whole connection says about their emotional truth, their patterns, the person they're becoming. The real decision isn't as simple as stay or go. At its heart, it's about whether they're willing to be honest with themselves. That's exactly where the resistance is coming from. One part of them is drawn to you in a way that doesn't need justifying. It feels natural, almost like gravity. Your absence doesn't feel like relief to them. It feels unfinished, unresolved, like something that keeps resurfacing in the quiet moments no matter how hard they try to focus on something else. But another part of them pushes back just as hard, because fully admitting it would mean being vulnerable in a way they haven't practiced in years. It would mean giving up the image of control they lean on. It would mean choosing emotional honesty over emotional armor. And that kind of shift is uncomfortable. It shakes old defenses loose. It challenges the identity they built to feel safe. It asks them to move forward without any guarantees. That's why everything feels so much heavier right now. Why the silence feels louder than usual. Why the connection somehow feels more present even while you're apart. They're not just avoiding the truth anymore, they're starting to actually sit with it. And sitting with something you've spent a long time running from changes a person. They're asking themselves questions they can't just brush off. Why do you keep showing up in their thoughts? Why do quiet moments keep drifting back to you? Why hasn't anything else quite filled the space you left? These aren't passing, throwaway thoughts. They're persistent, the kind that loop over and over until something inside them is forced to answer honestly. This is the stage right before everything becomes clear, a point where the internal tension gets too constant to keep pushing aside. Eventually something has to give. Maintaining that careful distance starts feeling less like a choice and more like exhausting effort. The mask gets harder to hold up, and whatever follows that breaking point is truth, no matter what shape it takes. If they come back to you, it won't be because everything suddenly got easy. It'll be because they recognized something real, something rare, something that takes real discomfort to face honestly. And if they don't come back, that's not a verdict on your worth. It won't erase what was genuinely there between you. It'll just mean they weren't ready for the kind of emotional honesty and inner change this connection was asking of them. That limitation is theirs to carry, not yours. Which is exactly why the only steady place to stand right now is not chasing, not pushing, not trying to force an outcome in something that's still unfolding internally. Step back from trying to control what's still becoming clear on its own. Let the truth rise at whatever pace it needs to. Let time reveal what force never could. Inside them, two forces are still pulling in opposite directions. One is the pull toward you, familiar, emotional, instinctive, tied to memory and meaning. The other is an old protective wall built from past experiences, times when being open led to getting hurt, when trust cost them something. And right now, those two forces are still colliding, shaping all the uncertainty you're feeling between you. That old voice keeps telling them to stay behind the wall, stay guarded, stay distant, stay safe, no matter the cost. For a long time, those two forces clashed quietly in the background. But lately, the collision has gotten impossible to ignore. On the outside, life might look completely normal. They're still functioning, still showing up, still seeming composed, maybe even indifferent at times, but that calm exterior isn't the whole story, because the harder they try to bury what's happening inside, the stronger it comes back. This was never really a fight happening out in the open. It's always been an internal one. And that's exactly why what happens next matters more than it might look like from the outside. You became something in their life they never saw coming. Even without ever putting it into words at the time, this connection cracked open the careful structure they'd built around themselves for protection. It reached past the curated, managed version of them and touched something raw, something more real. Now they're standing at a fork in the road. One path keeps them exactly as they have always been, safely inside familiar limits. The other pushes them toward a version of themselves that requires openness, emotional risk, and a kind of courage they haven't had to reach for in a long time. Neither path feels easy. That's why this moment feels so draining from the inside. A shift is already underway, even if it's quiet. And what makes it matter isn't some dramatic external event. It's that the internal pressure has built up to a point where it can't stay balanced anymore. There's always a point in any inner struggle where holding two opposing truths at once becomes harder than just picking one. They're approaching that point now, not because of outside pressure, but because a mind can't sustain contradiction forever without eventually leaning one way. For a long time, they managed all this by downplaying what they felt, convincing themselves it was temporary, that it was manageable, that enough distance and time would make it fade. But feelings rooted in something real don't stay contained forever. They keep developing under the surface even while being ignored. And now they're surfacing harder than before, not in some neat, predictable way, but in sudden waves late at night, in quiet, unguarded moments. In the gaps between distractions when nothing else demands their attention. In those moments, their thoughts drift toward you without any effort at all, not a conscious choice, just a pattern that keeps repeating. Your absence plays a part in all this. When you stepped back, you didn't just remove yourself from their day-to-day life. You left behind space, and that space didn't stay empty. It became a mirror. It forced them to sit with everything your presence had quietly been giving them. The steadiness, the warmth, the feeling of being understood without needing to explain yourself. And once someone feels the actual shape of what's missing, the question in their head changes. It's no longer, did this matter? It becomes something much harder to sit with. Did I see its value too late? In their private thoughts, comparisons start happening naturally. Not always on purpose, not always consciously, but consistently, between what things felt like with you and what they feel like anywhere else. And that difference doesn't fade. It just keeps repeating. This isn't them romanticizing the past. It's them recognizing how deeply your presence affected them emotionally, how it made them feel more awake, more connected, more present in their own life. That's why this process isn't standing still. It's actively reshaping them from the inside. Staying stuck in the middle, not fully in, not fully out, doesn't feel sustainable to them anymore. It creates more strain than relief. Slowly they're realizing avoidance was never a real solution. It was just delay. Now fear and longing are colliding head-on inside them. On one side, the pull toward you, familiar, grounded, instinctive, something that doesn't need justifying. On the other, fear of being vulnerable, fear of exposure, fear of losing control, fear of repeating old wounds that taught them openness equals pain. That fear might not even fully belong to this situation. It may come from older experiences where trust got broken or honesty wasn't met safely. But regardless of where it came from, it's had a strong grip for a long time. What's changing now is that their desire is starting to speak louder than that fear. That's not a small shift. That's the start of movement, from self-protection toward honesty. It explains the constant push and pull. One moment there's a pull toward finally giving in emotionally, toward no longer fighting what's already there inside them. The next moment, fear reasserts itself and pulls the distance back. Both feelings are completely real, which is what makes this so destabilizing. They're not choosing between something true and something false. They're choosing between two things that both genuinely feel real. So they stay suspended, not because they don't feel anything, but because they're overwhelmed trying to hold too much feeling pulling in opposite directions. But that can't last forever. There's always a point where one side becomes strong enough to break the balance. When that happens, they'll either let fear keep them locked in place and distant, or they'll let their deeper emotional truth guide them towards something uncertain but real. And really, this was never only about the relationship. It's about identity, about who they're becoming, about whether they keep choosing to be someone who puts safety above everything else, or someone willing to step into emotional honesty even when it feels unfamiliar. That turning point is getting close. They've been circling the same thoughts for a long time, replaying memories, picking apart meanings, trying to find clarity through pure logic. But this isn't something that gets solved through analysis alone. Emotional truth doesn't wait around for perfectly reasoned arguments. It builds pressure until it forces itself to be acknowledged. And as that pressure grows, their behavior might shift. They may seem more withdrawn at times, more inward, less consistent. But that's not them checking out. That's internal processing. Sometimes distance doesn't mean disinterest. Sometimes it's the final stretch of a decision quietly forming under pressure. What's becoming obvious to them now is that staying in the middle isn't protecting them anymore. It's wearing them down. Being neither fully in nor fully out doesn't lessen the pain. It just spreads it across every single moment. So they're being pushed towards something they can't avoid forever, actually owning what they feel instead of managing it from a safe emotional distance. That kind of honesty removes every comfortable place left to hide. It forces them to face a question they've dodged for a long time. Are they willing to risk the familiar shape of their life for something that demands they grow beyond who they've allowed themselves to be? A sense of finality is building in all of this. The stage of maybe later of staying stuck in emotional limbo is starting to fade. What's replacing it is something much more demanding, clarity that can't be put off any longer. Whatever this connection is, they already know it isn't small. It's not some passing attraction or a temporary chapter that fizzles out on its own. It carries weight. It carries meaning. And because of that, the hesitation that once felt protective is starting to feel more like a trap. They're beginning to realize that avoiding a decision was never actual safety. It was just standing still. And staying emotionally stuck for too long becomes its own kind of pain. For a long time, they were good at managing what they felt. Logic was their shield. Distance became habit. Silence became the default. But feelings rooted in something real can't be controlled through avoidance forever. Eventually, when someone is left alone with their own thoughts long enough, truly alone, with no distractions or escape routes, what's real starts rising to the surface. And that's exactly what's happening now. This isn't coming from outside pressure. It's coming from within them. Something they suppressed is waking back up, and it no longer responds to the rational arguments they used to shrink it down. "I'm not sure" doesn't work as a defense anymore. Your presence has stayed too consistent in their inner world for uncertainty to carry the weight it used to. This is a turning point, because when someone starts missing not just you, but who they were when they were with you, the question quietly shifts. It's no longer about whether something mattered. That part's already settled. The real question becomes whether they're willing to face what that connection revealed inside them. At this stage, something very honest starts happening. The silence they've been holding onto starts reflecting back at them. It shows them where fear steered their decisions, where pride stood in for vulnerability, where avoidance quietly shaped outcomes they now have to look at again, this time with clearer eyes. They're revisiting old moments, conversations, pauses, except now with a level of emotional maturity they didn't have back then. What used to feel confusing is starting to make sense in hindsight. What once felt manageable is now showing its real emotional cost. This isn't just regret setting in. It's a reordering of what actually matters to them. The things they used to prioritize, control, image, self-protection, are starting to feel less important next to something that was emotionally real and alive. Alongside that, something else is quietly developing: empathy. They're starting to understand more clearly than before what their distance might have felt like from where you stood, what it costs someone to stay open while the other person pulls away. That kind of awareness changes how a person relates to their own choices. It gets a lot harder to brush off your own behavior once you fully understand the impact it had on someone else. Responsibility starts entering the picture, and with it, the story they tell themselves starts to change. They're no longer just reacting out of fear, they're starting to reflect on who they're becoming through those reactions. At this point, something more serious, though not dramatic, takes shape. A recognition that whatever comes next will say something real about the kind of person they're choosing to become. The soft language of maybe, someday, I'll think about it starts losing its power. In its place, something more solid forms, a sense of necessity, not pressure from outside, but an inner realization that avoidance isn't neutral anymore. It costs something. They're also starting to feel time differently, less endless, more limited, more precious. And that awareness changes how decisions feel from the inside. What used to feel like something that could wait indefinitely now feels like it carries a real cost with every day it's delayed. This even shows up physically, not just as a thought, but as a feeling: tension when they think about reaching out, discomfort at the idea of being fully honest, resistance when they try to stay the same. The unknown still scares them, but the known emptiness of staying exactly as they are is starting to feel even heavier. And that shift, when what they fear most starts to change, usually marks the beginning of real movement. Words they used to hold back start pressing closer to actually being said. Actions that once felt impossible start feeling unavoidable. Because once internal truth builds up enough intensity, silence stops feeling protective. It starts feeling like strain. And it's important to be clear about this. Whatever happens next won't be impulsive. It'll come from a long internal process of finally facing themselves without the shelter of excuses or distance. That's why this moment matters, not because of drama, but because honesty is finally becoming impossible to avoid. At the center of all of it is one simple, powerful truth. You changed something in them. You revealed something about their emotional depth, their capacity for connection, that they haven't been able to fully bury. Even through the silence, that impact has stayed. Now the internal noise is starting to settle. Confusion is separating from clarity. What's left is something harder to dismiss: recognition, They're realizing that pushing feelings down doesn't make them disappear, it just delays having to face them. What got buried didn't vanish. It grew quietly in the background until it demanded attention, and now it's visible. And when truth becomes visible, it asks for a response. Not more confusion, not more delay, an actual response. Whatever they choose next, whether it's moving toward you or choosing a different path, it won't come from uncertainty anymore. It'll come from clarity. And clarity changes everything. So if you've been sensing a shift, trust that instinct. Something inside them is reaching its final stage of becoming clear. A decision is forming, not out of confusion, but out of recognizing something that can no longer be ignored. The quiet right before that decision is often the most telling part of this entire process. In the end, it all comes down to this. Truth can only stay hidden for so long before it starts rising on its own. What started as uncertainty has turned into awareness. What used to feel confusing is slowly becoming clear. The distance, the silence, the hesitation, none of it was ever emptiness. It was an internal conflict finally reaching a point where it couldn't stay unresolved any longer. And now something irreversible is happening inside them. The excuses are losing their grip. The emotional noise is quieting down. And underneath all of it is something simple, undeniable, and real. A recognition of what you meant to them, a recognition of what they felt, and a recognition that staying in denial isn't something they can keep doing. This is the turning point where avoidance stops being an option and honesty becomes the only way forward, not because any of it is easy, but because everything they've been hiding has finally become too heavy to keep ignoring. Whatever direction they choose from here won't come from confusion anymore. It will emerge from a place of unmistakable clarity, where the truth has become impossible to ignore, rationalize, or hide behind. The questions that once kept them trapped in endless circles of doubt begin to lose their grip because they are no longer searching for answers. Deep down, they already have them. What changes is not the reality itself, but their willingness to finally face it without excuses. They can no longer convince themselves that their feelings are temporary, that the connection meant less than it actually did, or that avoiding the situation will somehow make it disappear. Once truth settles into the heart with complete honesty, it becomes something that cannot be unseen or unfelt. It quietly reshapes every thought, every decision, and every path forward. That is the true conclusion of this journey. It is not about finally knowing with absolute certainty what they will choose or how the story will unfold. Life rarely offers that kind of guarantee. Instead, the ending lies in something far more meaningful. It lies in the fact that the illusion has fallen away. The uncertainty they once used as protection no longer exists. They know what they feel. They know what they have lost. They know what stands before them. The only question that remains is whether they have the courage to let their actions reflect that truth. From this point onward, words matter less than behavior. Promises, explanations, and good intentions all fade into the background because actions become the only language capable of revealing genuine change. If they have truly grown, that growth will be visible through consistency, accountability, and emotional presence. If fear still holds the steering wheel, that will become equally clear through hesitation, avoidance, or continued silence. Either way, the truth has already done its work. What happens next will not create reality, it will simply reveal it. And perhaps that is the greatest form of clarity anyone can receive. There is no longer a need to guess, analyze every interaction, or search for hidden meanings beneath mixed signals. The next chapter will write itself through choices, not possibilities. Whether they move toward love or away from it, they can no longer claim they did not understand what was at stake. The truth has already reached them. Everything that follows will simply reveal whether they are willing to live according to it.